Hello, welcome to A View from Brussels. My name is Brandy Miller, and today in the studio, I'm delighted to welcome Rahul Venkit, who is EU-India commentator. Rahul, thank you for being here.
Such a pleasure.
So I wanted to turn a bit to what's been happening in the news as well as what's not happening. Namely, we're starting to see a shift of attention moving over to the Middle East and shifting away from the evolving historic moment of the EU-India partnership agreement from security to trade. So in light of that, I want to understand from you, why should we not be shifting our attention from this momentous agreement?
It's such a great question, Brandy. The EU-India deals that have been announced, almost a month ago now, have been about 20 years in the making. We're talking about one of the biggest intentional geopolitical shifts in our lifetimes. And it is not an agreement about trade, but an agreement through trade. And so this is the EU and India really pitching itself, opening itself up to different partners, given that kind of this diversification of economic dependence is now a necessity, right? Allies are not perhaps behaving as allies anymore. And this shift has been a long time coming. And so what we are seeing now is actually us, the EU and India, hedging their bets and creating, the numbers are all there.
It's, of course.
Right, like 25% of the global GDP, 2 billion people, a market that's the largest we've ever seen, 1.5 of which, perhaps come from India. But then you've got the EU, which is purchasing power and market access. And so this is all a game of how market access can now help you win influence.
So on that, would you say that the agreement is still very critical to what Europe is trying to do in terms of becoming a political and more strategic actor? And how would you maybe anchor that into today and what we're starting to see, how the EU is responding to tensions in the Middle East?
So, Brandy, again, it's a superb question. So I'm a big picture guy, right? If you were to look at the broader arch of history, I would say after World War II, the EU spent its time in development, democracy, human rights, really shoring up its industry, and perhaps let slip the defense and security side of things.
Yeah.
And now, given that the wheels of the world are turning in a different way, in that it's less secure, economic partnerships that were counted upon before cannot be trusted just as much, and so the way the EU is now trying to cast its net globally, right? So EU-India has gotten a lot of focus because of the sheer size of the two partners.
Yeah, the two blocks coming together.
The world's two largest democratic blocs.
Exactly.
However, even in the Indo-Pacific, there have been free trade agreements with Indonesia. There is one being negotiated with the Philippines. And so this is part of a concerted effort, by the EU, by the External Action Service. I follow their work to quite an extent. They hold strategic dialogues with pretty much every country in the Indo-Pacific, exactly to create a larger market. So it's part of a bigger picture. And it's promising. It's just that in a world where market access is also then becoming political.
Naturally.
Right. It's just all the more necessary for the EU to do this, and kudos for it to get it done. Getting 27 member states to speak in one voice, agree on text. It's nothing short of a Herculean achievement.
And on the note of, you're speaking about market access and the economic benefits of the trade agreement, as well as, of course, the security and defense partnership, which is being discussed.
Absolutely.
So according to you, what do you think is maybe not getting enough airtime at this moment within that context?
Yeah, but just to pick up on the security and defense partnership,
yes,
right? This kind of happened a little bit along with the free trade agreement. And at the moment, I have the honor of serving as the communications officer for one of the EU's flagship security and defense projects. And this one has been on since 2020. So yet again, it kind of speaks to the EU's foresight in the domains of security and defense as well, with the Indo-Pacific. And these partnerships also have very strong economic tangible outcomes, by which I mean that there is, a 150 billion euro defense loan fund. It's called SAFE, by the EU. And thanks to this free trade agreement and the security and defense partnership, Indian companies, in theory, in the future, could be contenders when it comes to public procurement procedures to win tenders, in construction and the manufacture of defense and security equipment. So, so much is intertwined, and there's so much potential that has been unlocked now that it's kind of heartening to see that the regulatory barriers, and this was both blocks being, guilty of having very high barriers for entry.
Yeah.
But then I think given the state of the world and in a sign of the times, they both lowered these barriers, right? To answer your question more precisely, I think we've all spoken about, textiles and then European drinks and then, technology and worker mobility. What does not perhaps get as much airtime to me is space.
Okay. Could you elaborate a bit on what you would hope would get a bit more airtime specifically?
So just in short, and again, speaking as a generalist, Indian ingenuity, along with EU machinery, EU standards, I think there is a lot that can be done in both blocks, exchanging, technology, information, highly skilled workers.
Exactly. That's going to be my follow-up question is how do you see, or how do you maybe tie that into, but you can finish your thought on space.
Yeah, that's what it takes, right?
Yeah.
It takes potential, it takes markets, and then it takes good people. I think through history, we have seen countries and blocks that do well attracting the best talent. And so if barriers for entry are getting higher and more difficult, to formally welcoming places like the United States, it just makes so much sense that the EU and India say, all right, you know what, let's try and work together.
Yeah.
Let's try and see if we can put our heads together, overcome, whatever initial cultural differences there may be. There are only a few examples of, European companies doing well in India and Indian entrepreneurs and companies doing well here. But what's going to be exciting to see is how this mushrooms and we can build on these blocks in the future.
So we've spoken about from the EU side a little bit on what's in it for India. We've seen that this agreement described as it's not just an agreement, it's a partnership, and it's something that is not just a deal, it's more. Could you speak a bit more of what this means for India in terms of the negotiations and how it brought it to opening up, reducing barriers as it did, which brought this agreement forward?
Yeah, Ursula von der Leyen, I think, very now famously called it the mother of all deals.
Yes.
And touted the fact that, India has never in its history given as much market access to any other trade partner, right? This is huge. This is significant. I mean, India being a traditionally, protectionist, conservative economy that has a rising middle class, but also a lot of people who depend primarily on agriculture. So it's a lot of mouths to feed. It's a lot of dreams to fulfill.
What's the population size these days?
Yeah, it's 1.4 billion.
1.4 billion, which is significant within the world.
1.5 billion by the time this conversation is over.
Probably.
It's a huge part of the world, and so giving access to the EU was no mean feat. But I was actually in touch with interlocutors, especially from the Indian side, who gave me some insight and said that finally it came down to two people from representing these massive, gigantic blocks of humanity. Maros Sefcovic from the EU. And the Indian Trade Minister, Piyush Goyal. And it seems that their chemistry and their willingness to get this done, which, by the way, was meant to happen by the end of last year.
Wow, okay.
Right? Many people will say that, oh no, was it actually, Trump's statements on Greenland.
Exactly. That's been a misconception that's out of the state of the agreement. As you mentioned at the start, 20 years in the making.
With stops and starts.
Stops and starts.
Right.
Yeah.
And with a lot of, they were like these twinning projects of think tanks between the two nations, between the two blocs, again, talking about how they may collaborate. And even in India, the EU has something called a comprehensive strategic agreement and partnership. And so, this has been very, very tediously and really clinically put together. Right, so it's kind of the fruition of all this effort, which is why I suppose it made for quite a media splash as well. If you remember,
of course,
like February 2025, all the entire College of Commissioners, show up in New Delhi. They've never all just showed up in a partner country before, showing very strong willingness, and India repaying that. I think that those actions by lowering barriers, and I think now is the time for businesses, right, to put their money where their mouth is, and then take these tentative steps forward to hopefully find concrete actions and stable.
And you did mention, so from businesses to also then people mobility. Yeah. So what do you think will be some of the immediate effects coming for the mobility as well as the investments on both sides?
It's a very, very, very good point here. Now, traditionally, I mean, if you look at India as kind of the workforce of the world, right? Highly trained, highly skilled, and also complementing EU capacities. I think there's a lot of core STEM subjects, engineers who do coding and do all the hard stuff, if you want to put it that way. And so, whenever countries have let in Indian workers, right, there have been blue cards for the EU to try and
green cards is for the other side, which I think some of those might be paused for the time being, unfortunately.
Exactly, harder to come by.
Let's try more with the blue card.
Exactly. That's what's happening. And so even in Belgium, for example, the Indian embassy will tell you there are about 45 to 50,000 Indian workers here with families. And what they do is that they unlock so many more hundreds of thousands, if not millions of euros in kind of downstream revenue. They come in and fill these key gaps. But the feedback has been that what industry needs, I think ministries of immigration have not been able to deliver. And often you'll find also Parliament, it'll be rife with all these talk about, is it too many migrants? Are we able to meaningfully integrate these workers into the economy? All fair points.
Yeah.
But then worker mobility, I think, just to put it very simply, if an Indian is employed in a company in Belgium, will he or she then have also the right to work in Germany, in France, in Sweden, thereby allowing companies to extract more value? At the moment, it's all mired in red tape and bureaucracy. And so these are the kind of tangible results that I think from the Indian perspective they would like to see. And in terms of investments, kudos to the EU here. 2 weeks ago, there was the launch of a EU legal gateway office in New Delhi. And so again, this is the EU saying, okay, this is your one-stop shop, for EU and Indian businesses to actually understand what the text of this free trade agreement will mean. How do you find funding? How do you find the right talent? How do you make sure that you tick all the boxes and make sure things are being done in the correct way? So, this are all promising signs.
Promising indeed. And of course, making through the legal jargon, what that entails, and it's going to be a tiered process. It's not overnight that we're going to see these changes. I did want to switch a little bit more to your background, particularly in media and communications, as you mentioned. So countering disinformation as well as protecting democratic discourse is also a key theme that is arisen on both sides. So coming from your background, how do you see narratives shaping the trust as part of the EU and India partnership?
I'm loving all the questions, by the way.
Good. Happy to hear that.
They're really excellent. And so you and I, Brandy, as well, working and having the background that we do, we do know that ultimately it's not just weapons, but the pen is mightier than the sword, right? It's media narratives that are now the primary weapon. My personal observation, I think, is that most people in Europe may have what I call like an unenlightened image of India, right? It's always like that one inflammatory story, and it clouds their judgment, and it's not perhaps kept and perceived in the scale of a country of 1.4 billion people.
Yeah.
And the same is to be said of the Indian media when it comes to the EU, right? I also kind of contribute as a freelance correspondent for an Indian television station, but the only time they come to me is when Europe is burning, right?
Yeah. So let's see if they're calling at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm on TV, run, right?
Yeah.
But so this, I think, needs to change.
Okay.
And perhaps if the media can then put the spotlight on more bread and butter issues for people of both continents. If these two blocks are to truly build a partnership, right, that is meant to last and go beyond just kind of profit seeking, because that's another point completely. How much more capitalism can the world take, right? We've reached peak capitalism, this is for sure. And so if India and the EU is a world leader when it comes to regulation, when it comes to climate and environmental policies, and India has shown very strong willingness, within its constraints,
naturally,
to pursue this path. And so if these two blocks are to truly unlock all these potential, the media will also have to kind of dig a little bit deeper. There are, in fact, this is something else I learned from, the backstage of all these negotiations for the free trade agreement. The Indian mentality often goes beyond the text of a trade, of an agreement. It kind of wants you to be a friend, a partner that will stand by its side. For example, if India gets the message that the EU, is a steadfast partner, that, for example, it will condemn terrorism the next time an attack happens in India, those are the kind of signals and messages that will tell Indian businesses as well that, you know what? These guys get it. They're with us.
Yeah, there's trust to be had.
Not just, looking at a contract and ticking the boxes on them, but kind of going above and beyond. It's just something that's deeply rooted in the Indian psyche. And so these are the little more je ne sais quoi points that may truly help people-to-people flow, and then hopefully also business.
That makes sense. So I guess perhaps as a last question, what do you think, speaking to our audience, some of the shared values that you want to get across that exist between India and the EU, and what you would hope for this agreement, and I may be countering some of that disinformation moving forward?
The Indian, in Sanskrit, there is this saying, Vaisudeva Kutumbakam. And I will translate.
Yeah, for our subtitles.
Yeah, exactly. It means the world is my family. And if you look at Indian history, while it has been a collection of princely states, etc., as a country, it has never invaded anyone in its history. It is quintessentially a peaceful nation, that also, like China, has a long, continuous history. And so this is where the more, esoteric and the more principle and value-led leadership and governance will truly land in Europe if people in the EU can also see this. I know that there have been certain misalignments, shall we say, right? I mean, we're living in such a multipolar world.
Yeah.
The EU may not be able to convince India, for example, to stop buying Russian oil, because, India and Russia have been friends long before the EU was even a thing, to put it very simply. So, here you will find certain divergences, and I think the EU also now shows that it understands that we live in this multipolar world. All you can do is come up with a charm offensive, and so from the media side of things to countering, FEMI, right, foreign interference and manipulation, to having more people-to-people flow. Sometimes when I think about this, India and Europe also have large kind of media film industries.
As well, yeah.
At the moment, it's fair to say that the US film industry kind of dominates, right? Culturally, the US has kind of always been a reference point. But just putting it out there, is it time to find new references? This has to be done in a conscientious, intentful way, where perhaps there can be more media exchange as well between these two blocks. Bollywood.
Bollywood aside, maybe.
Bollywood is,
or embodying it.
Part of this charm offensive. But so it's going to take really these two peoples seeing each other in that way with potential, and not as strangers or as people who don't want the same things. Because I feel, as the two largest democratic blocs, they already are the most natural partners that exist, and so it's not that the EU has to work on becoming partners with India, but just be what they're destined to be.
Well, thank you, Rahul, again for your time. And what was that you said in Sanskrit? That the world is my family?
That's right. Vaisudeva Kutumbakam.
With that, thank you everyone for joining today, and we'll see you next time on A View from Brussels.